Hello, John.
Hey, George. How are you?
How are you? Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I am already getting that faint twinge of melancholy because at the end of this month, school will resume. I start teaching again, and I kind of look forward to it, but it's been a great summer, so, I'm a little sad at the same time.
Yeah, wow, so it's just that same kind of feeling that you get when you're a kid in school, and suddenly it's like August, and you go, oh my God.
Exactly.
Yeah, you realize the summer's not infinite after all.
Yeah.
I remember that feeling.
It's very much like that, except now I'm 60 years old and I'm having that feeling. So I guess it shows that the deep structures of our mind really don't change that much.
Well, yeah, it's like, we keep dreaming that suddenly we realize that we'd signed up for third semester calculus and had completely forgotten. And the class is like, the final is like in an hour.
Right. Except now,
and then you have to go wing it.
Now my panic dreams, though, instead of being the student who has forgotten something really important going on, it's that I'm the professor, and of course that's much worse because a student can just blow off class or just go sneaking off, and if you're the professor, the potential for humiliation is exponentially worse.
Yeah, I guess that's true because you have this, this whole audience looking at you.
Right.
Yeah. God, I still have the student dream.
Yeah.
Although sometimes I do have a public speaking dream, or else a musician dream, where I'm on the stage and suddenly ready to go on, and I don't remember anything I'm going to say, or I don't remember the chords to the song, or
that's
ingrained.
We've probably talked about it before, but I've been really fascinated by stage fright for a long time, and I think I've actually even contemplated writing a book about stage fright because I think it's one of those things that everybody is familiar with, but that hasn't been considered very deeply. At least I can't find anything on it, and to me it seems like it's a clue to the nature of the self and how we're constructed and how we have this avatar that we create and that we present to the world. And ordinarily that works out fine, but in certain situations the whole construct starts crumbling or is in danger of crumbling. And that, to me, stage fright is related to that somehow.
Wow. But I've always thought there was something very primal about it.
Yeah.
I remember this feeling of walking out. It was a talk that I was giving. I even remember where it was. It was in Portland, Oregon, and it was one of these things where it was actually in a theater.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're kind of raised up on what would be a stage during a performance, and then looking out over the tiers of seats, and then just kind of suddenly it flashed in my mind that I was walking out of a cave in the morning and suddenly finding myself surrounded by this hostile tribe with spears and looking at me.
It's funny you say that because I'm just finishing up this peculiar book that I've been working on for a while, and I've got a riff on stage fright in it, and I'm thinking about my own struggles with stage fright, and then I wonder if hunter-gatherers, if people before civilization had stage fright, or if stage fright is something very modern, a disease of complex social relations. But of course, hunter-gatherers had complex social relations too.
Yeah. Or is it just the fear of being or perceiving that you're one against many? I mean, and then your brain kind of realizes that this is not a situation where you're probably going to be attacked.
Yeah, except the weird thing about stage fright, I don't know about you, but it's often worse when, so I often speak, especially back in my end of science days, I spoke a lot to extremely hostile audiences.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I wouldn't really get stage fright in situations like that. It was more like I was ready to fight. I was prepared for combat. I got stage fright more when I thought that the audience was very sympathetic and really wanted me to succeed, and that's when I would be in terror, falling on my face.
Yeah, and not living up to their expectations.
Yeah, so it's not a simple fear response.
No,
I mean, it's fearful, but it's not completely analogous to fearing for your physical safety, for example.
Yeah, it's a whole. Yeah, I mean, it's probably. I mean, that probably evokes those ancient fears of physical safety too.
Yeah.
Because I think it's why. And I remember in this particular instance in Portland, then I just immediately kind of described how that to the audience as a joke, and then everyone laughed, and then I immediately felt, like these are. It's a friendly tribe that's outside my cave door, and then I,
excellent gambit.
Just fine, and I think gave a pretty good talk. But other times it hasn't really gone away, and it's not stage fright in the sense that it keeps you from doing it, but maybe doing you don't do it as well as. Of course, they never go as well as you'd anticipated. You imagine all this smooth flow of one thought from the other, and then it starts jamming up at some point.
You get the yips.
The yips.
You know what the yips is?
Oh, I should. I've heard the term.
It's a wonderful term. I love it. It's from golf, and it's a kind of physical stage fright because, of course, athletes there are all these different manifestations of stage fright. It can be a very specific physical thing. So the yips typically affects golfers in their precision games when they're putting, and they just completely they get panic attacks and are incapable of. I mean, they might literally be doing a 10-foot putt and then smack the ball 50 feet. They totally lose it. There was a wonderful case from the Yankees. Remember Chuck Knobloch, the second baseman for the Yankees?
I wouldn't be the one to ask.
Okay, well this is about I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 years ago. Really talented second baseman. Yankees paid a lot of money for him, and he developed the yips as a fielder. Second base is really a pretty easy position. You're just tossing the ball over to the first baseman. Not a big deal. And now Block couldn't throw the damn ball to the first baseman. He started throwing the ball into the stands. He had incredibly wild throws. There was a catcher for the New York Mets who had a similar case of the throwing yips. There's a guy named Mickey something. I can't remember his last name. And his problem was he would just be tossing the ball back to the pitcher, and he developed a hitch where he would make a throwing motion over and over again, and he couldn't release the ball. And then when he did release it, he'd throw pop flies. And if there was somebody on base, this guy would throw the ball so high up in the air that runners could advance on the bases. It's weird shit. I think it's. I also wonder. I think there are these experiments that could probe the nature of stage fright. For example, I wonder if psychopaths get stage fright.
Oh yeah, you'd think not.
You'd think not. I mean, you've met, I'm sure, some people who just have this almost preternatural self-confidence, where they seem completely immune to embarrassment and shame and self-doubt and things like that, because they are completely invested in their avatars. And
invested in their avatars, and they're Yeah. And they're either really, in the case of speakers, they're either really great, excellent speakers, or they think they are, and they're actually really annoying.
That's true. There is such a thing as an incompetent psychopath or an incompetent con man who has so little empathy for others that he or she does a really bad job manipulating people. Has the confidence, but still can't pull it off.
But so someone who becomes their avatar, is that basically what you mean? I mean, there's no, I mean, for most of us, we have this persona, and the persona is sort of different depending on whether we're talking to, different people or different categories of people, friends or colleagues or speaking to an audience, and the avatar changes, and then there's always, we still feel like there's this homunculus kind of crouched down inside our brain, behind our eyes, peering out through its own eyes ad infinitum, and that we're performing and we're not acting like our real selves. But
yeah,
you're describing someone where that just merges, so there's no gap, and then.
Yeah, I think that, so my understanding of psychopaths is that they don't have this kind of involuntary distancing from themselves and doubt of these personas that we create that we ordinary people have, that can lead that can lead in extreme cases to stage fright.
We should ask our friend Kevin Dutton, we met in Cambridge.
Yeah.
Cambridge, England, who wrote the book about psychopaths.
Yep.
Wow, he was an interesting character.
He was, and Kevin himself has a little bit of the psychopath in him. He's admitted that. I'm not.
No, I'm sure he would.
And he said that his father did too. His father was a little bit of kind of like a benign con artist. Kevin describes him as. I mean, a lot of
it was the Cockney swagger.
Yes, and so apparently, I just read something online where there's this controversy now over Kevin's book, The Wisdom of Psychopaths, one of the great all-time book titles, and how
Wisdom of Psychopaths.
And how there's another scholarly expert on psychopaths who has been very critical of Kevin, because Kevin is just saying that psychopaths have some qualities that we could all benefit from, and this guy says that psychopaths are predators, they're all bad. And that's just not true. There are some people who do have this super confidence, but can channel it in very positive directions, both for their...
But would you still define them as psychopaths, or is the definition, constructed so that it would be... it would refer specifically to something where it's harmful or threatening to other people.
That's true. I guess if you have path at the end, then by definition.
Yeah, well, yeah, right. But you can have some of the qualities without it being a pathology.
Right. So
yeah, that certainly seems plausible.
Yeah.
Then the person would merely be annoying.
Right. Or maybe
not.
Maybe extremely charming, as many psychopaths are. I mean, Kevin, I found to be immensely entertaining, charming, and all that. But he's got some Barney in him. And sort of knows how to. I think it's certainly a useful trait. For writers, if you know how to tell stories and entertain people and dazzle people and so forth.
Politicians and actors. Well, actors, though, of course, have to slip in and out of different personas.
Yeah.
But musicians, I mean, that would be an interesting difference, it seems, or at least a subset of it, because in that case, the avatar that you're projecting isn't like a simulation of you on stage, pretending to be John Horgan, but a much smarter John Horgan,
Right.
who has immediate command of every bit of information about the most recent subject that he wrote a book about,
Right.
or any other author, including myself. Or, but with the musician, they're detaching themselves, and then it's all flowing through in this abstract form with their music.
Yeah.
Maybe abstract is not the word.
Well, obviously musicians can be, their careers, performing careers, can be ruined by stage fright. There's some famous examples of that. I think the person everybody knows about is Carly Simon, the great female rocker who had terrible stage fright. I happen to have met recently a very famous film and theater actor, and I was talking about stage fright with him, and he said he basically got over it when he was a young man, and it never came back, but he knows some of the most famous actors in the world who have, out of the blue, they're at the peak of their careers. They could be in their 50s and 60s and have had thousands of performances at a very high level in very stressful situations without getting stage fright, and suddenly they get stage fright again.
Wow.
And it's absolutely debilitating. Which again, it seems very mysterious and interesting to me.
Well, one of my favorite, I don't know if it's a case of that or not, but at least related to it was Glenn Gould, the pianist. And how, he became very famous as a young man, and particularly for his rendition of the Goldberg variations. And at some point, very early in his career, he just arbitrarily said he wasn't going to perform anymore, because the way he described it was there was just always this dissatisfaction between the Platonic image that he had of the musical piece, like Bach's Goldberg variations, and the inevitable imperfection of the performance. So it was almost like there was kind of this Gnostic dilemma, where the Gnostics basically were, just appalled and sorrowful of the fact that they were pure spirit captured, weighed down on earth with this flesh and mass. And then Gould at some point just would only record, and he had to have just complete perfection over the recording. So everything that you hear on a Glenn Gould recording, except for the few early ones that are recorded live, were, recorded in bits, again and again until he got it right and put together, to sound like this smooth performance. So that, he'd come as close as he could, as I understand it, to his Platonic perfection of the song, as he conceived it, but it would be never something that he could actually perform.
Oh my God, think of placing that burden on yourself. The burden of achieving perfection. As you were speaking, I remember that this actor I was just talking about said that he thought that the reason for this sort of mid-career or late-career stage fright of extremely successful actors had to do with their success, and that they became increasingly conscious of how high the expectations of their audience had become. And increasingly terrified of not fulfilling those expectations.
Do we get to know who the actor is, or would that need to be trained?
Yeah, I can't really say, but anyway, I don't know. Maybe one of these days I will do something on that.
Maybe we could let anyone listening to this, maybe they could submit guesses.
Okay, sure.
I think we need a game or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, there's something else. I gave you a hint that by email that I'm going through another period of extreme literary enthusiasm. So last summer I spent rereading Ulysses. And, it was great, but I had read Ulysses. I had read a lot of Joyce as a young man, and so it was more of a rediscovery. This summer, George, do you happen to be a Jane Austen fan?
Actually, I'm not, but not because, I find anything lacking in Jane Austen. It's just that I'm embarrassed to say I've never read her. Oh. So she's all still lying ahead there for me.
Okay. Oh, well, that's exactly what I would have said maybe 3 months ago, except I also would have said I associate Jane Austen with kind of musty, dusty, repressed Victorian English non-sexuality and extremely prissy morality and all that kind of stuff. And Valerie, my girlfriend, has been just bugging me to check out Jane Austen for a while. And so I found a free edition of Pride and Prejudice on Kindle, and so I bought it. And I immediately became so enthralled by Jane Austen. She's immediately one of my favorite all-time writers. She is so brilliant. And, I talked about how I thought of Joyce as being this really like a scientific explorer of the mind and somebody who taught us a lot about how the mind works and what it feels like moment by moment to be a human being. Jane Austen I think of as even more scientific in some ways than Joyce. She has this, what I didn't realize about her is that she's really funny. She has this extremely dry, kind of affectionate but dispassionate view of humans as these kinds of silly creatures who have all these complications in their relations with each other and all these strong emotions and these powerful feelings about themselves and others and do all these absurd things. And she is just watching them like this anthropologist. And there is so much wisdom about human nature, about human behavior, about the way our minds work in Jane Austen. So I'm now I started with Pride and Prejudice, and then I went through Sense and Sensibility, and now I'm just finishing up Emma. Those are really, I think, her three great novels, although I might check out the lesser stuff as well. And she's just great, George. I really highly recommend her. And
so I should start with Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, that's the great one. The wonderful thing about Jane Austen is that she works as pure entertainment. I mean, you really immediately start caring a lot about these characters and what happens to them, and it's all about love and money.
Right.
But then she's constantly giving you these little flashes of insight into human behavior that are absolutely modern and absolutely apply to
I'm hooked.
To us today. So we talked a while ago about just two big sort of scientific themes that really emerge very powerfully in her work. One is deception and self-deception. So I reviewed this book by the great evolutionary theorist Robert Trivers about, a year and a half ago, and then he came to my school, and so Trivers talks about how we have these innate tendencies to deceive others, and then inevitably to deceive ourselves, and Austen dramatizes deception and self-deception brilliantly, and often also shows how, unfortunately, self-deception in particular seems to be proportional to intelligence. So this is really true of this book I'm just finishing now, Emma. So Emma is this brilliant young woman who's extremely manipulative, loves to control other people's romantic lives, and is in some ways really intelligent, brilliant, but in other ways is totally clueless. In fact, there's a movie called Clueless that was a modern adaptation of Emma placed in a California high school with all these rich girls. And another great theme is how romance, the way that we sort of choose mates and fall in love and so forth. It's this incredibly complicated mixture of reason and emotion. And and Austen is very, very suspicious of sort of pure love at first sight, and passion, but is also very suspicious of people who are too calculating. Anyway, all right, I just had to get that off my chest. Oh, and
no, that's great.
And by the way, this has happened to me a lot. I really get into something for various random reasons, and then I find that I'm at the tail end of this big demographic trend.
Oh, yeah. And there's been this huge resurgence with Austen. Of course, now they put her on the 10-pound note in the UK.
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah, which is great. But there's apparently this just real misogynist vitriol that followed that. At least in social media and this huge backlash, but which was pretty shocking. But
who would object?
It was also peculiar, for an American to read about this, and people were talking about, how, they were about to be in this situation where there was no woman on a pound note of any denomination in the United Kingdom, except for the Queen, and she kind of didn't count because, of course, she was going to be there. And I thought, wow, and then they were, but of course, the sad part is they were removing Charles Darwin, so now they don't have this great scientist. And I was thinking, in the United States, imagine if they tried to put Darwin on. Like the $50 bill, they probably pick something obscure just to, keep the, areas of the Midwest, from revolting. But it just made me think, is there some law that says that our currency has to have pictures of presidents on it? But wait, it doesn't, because it has Ben Franklin, so.
It's just easier that way, I guess, so you don't get into these silly controversies over who you've chosen.
I guess, yeah. And it has to be really, that people who are so old that they're not involved in any political, people don't remember the history, except, they just have this vague, warm feeling about forefathers.
Yeah.
But, God, wouldn't it be great to put Darwin on one of our notes?
God, yes, but
of course he's not American.
No, but
Francis Crick.
Well, he's not American either.
That's right.
James Watson, that misogynist.
I bet he would be all for that.
James Watson would not be a good choice. Not a good representative of science.
Okay.
There's always Einstein. I don't know who's...
Einstein would have to be, but I was trying to think of more recent, but Einstein would be great. But again, he's not American.
Stephen Jay Gould.
Stephen Jay Gould, yeah. I thought Gould was great, but that would be controversial within evolutionary science. And,
Richard Dawkins. We could have fun with it.
Yeah, they would say, well, now you have a punk eek guy on one of the bills, so now we have to have a gradualist on one of the others.
Yeah, that's that would be fun actually to you'd say, okay, we're going to put this guy on here, and a lot of people are going to hate this choice. We're going to put Richard Gould, Stephen Jay Gould on now, but next year we'll put on a Stephen Jay Gould hater. We'll maybe put on Richard Dawkins.
It could be like postage stamps where they would change it regularly.
Right.
And E.O. Wilson would be great.
Yes. Everybody almost loves Ed Wilson.
Well, except except the people who say, oh, yeah, he was one of the early ringleaders of this sociobiology.
Well, you could have him as the biodiversity guy. The
biodiversity guy who reached out to evangelical Christians.
Right, you could show Ed Wilson staring at an ant on his finger or something. Everybody would love that.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes, and then you could have ants like crawling all over the, through the crevices inside the numbers on the bill. And
oh yeah, geez, they should have. They could really have fun. They should loosen up and
make them like postage stamps.
Right. I mean, then of course you can have artists, and I mean, I could see maybe Lady Gaga on.
Oh God. Yeah,
Michael Jackson.
The thing is, we're not gonna have postage stamps probably soon. So
right.
At some point, that's an extravagance they'll cut out as they continue to dismantle the federal government. Oh, okay. So we've got it's quite of a wide-ranging tangent of tangents.
Yeah. I keep coming back to this idea, the old idea of Noam Chomsky. We will always learn more about ourselves from novels than from scientific psychology. I really think it's true. The poor scientists who are trying to understand the human mind, whatever the hell that is, are just playing catch up to Shakespeare and Jane Austen and James Joyce and people like that.
Yeah, and some modern novelists too, like Richard Ford's. The trilogy beginning with The Sports Writer and Independence Day and Lay of the Land. I recently reread the trilogy, and it's just so wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. I've got to mention a super trendy, very young novelist whose latest novel I just read. Have you heard of a guy named Tao Lin?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, the reason I know about him is because he wrote me about 2 months ago and said he had a new novel coming out called Taipei. I'm looking over at the book jacket right now. He's I think he's still only 29, maybe just turned 30. He's already written maybe 3 or 4 novels, kind of indie novels, kind of a cult following, not very widely read. And this new novel, though, got a rave review in the New York Times. It's been very positively reviewed all over the place. But anyway, Tao Lin wrote me because he said he's got a little passage in it about being a kid in high school and reading The End of Science. And so he just thought it would be nice to send me a copy of his book and point out this passage. And I was thrilled. And so, of course, I read his book, and it's amazing. It's obviously pretty autobiographical. It's about a young Chinese American writer who is hanging out with these other kind of drifting 20-something kids in New York and taking massive amounts of drugs. I mean,
that would
unbelievable. Like everything.
So that's the part he was talking about in The End of Science, where you're describing your LSD experiment or something in the lying out or sitting in a tree in Connecticut or something.
Well, he was describing the singularity, but he didn't specifically allude to the fact that I was probably tripping.
Okay.
But no, and he's actually the best writer about what it's like to be fucked up on drugs that I've ever read. He's really phenomenal. He's doing excellent.
This sounds like a book blurb.
It's really, I actually tweeted him, but I really mean it. I mean, I've read a lot of drug fiction and nonfiction, and I've written about my own drug experiences, but Tao Lin writes about being high. I mean, he talked about going on, giving a book talk, being on a book tour and taking, I don't know, like Adderall and ecstasy and LSD and mushrooms and maybe a little bit of heroin all at the same time.
Wow.
Fucking crazy.
To overcome his stage fright.
Yeah. Well, but then he would freak out. He describes all these emotions and bizarre cognitive delusions just ripping through your mind constantly when you're really high. And in a way that's nobody has ever done before. What it actually reminded me of a little bit, because
You really should have reviewed this book.
I think I'm going to.
I just love these lines. I can just imagine them on the jacket of the paperback edition.
Well, it reminds me of,
the front.
And then I've seen other people say the same thing. It reminded me of The Sun Also Rises, in that you've got these people. So Hemingway was writing about, that was an autobiographical novel about these young people in Europe who are kind of drifting around and are all alcoholics, right?
Right.
And he describes the kind of manic depression of alcoholism, how, you're having a great time 1 minute, the next you're suicidally depressed. And it's because you have no real anchor, you're lost. This is, the lost generation was coined to describe the people in The Sun Also Rises. And people had made that comparison of Tao Lin to Hemingway. The guy is really getting compared to people at the very highest levels of...
who's Tao? How do you spell Tao Lin?
Tao Lin. And his most recent novel is Taipei.
Okay.
So, yeah. Anyway. Literature.
Yeah. Great thing, literature.
Yeah. That's why I figured I finally decided this book I'm writing, I'm going to call it a novel.
Your stream of consciousness project you're describing?
Yes.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Well, I like it.
I've been thinking a lot about the literature of cancer.
Uh-huh.
Just because, of course, my book's coming out at the end of the month, and there's something that I'm writing that's related to that I was asked to write, but I can't really talk about it in detail. But while I was writing the Cancer Chronicles, I was reading a lot of both fiction and very literary nonfiction. About cancer, where cancer played a big role, and partly because I was hunting for, epigraphs for the book, the little quotes at the beginning, and it was just interesting that, things that I hadn't read before, like Solzhenitsyn's Cancer Ward, for example.
Was that actually about a cancer ward?
Yeah.
Pardon my ignorance.
Yeah, and but of course it's presented as the cancer ward being the metaphor for totalitarian state, and yeah, sure. I mean, it definitely, and there were all kinds of cross links between what was going on in the hospital and out in the world, and one of the people who was confined in the cancer hospital was like Solzhenitsyn, someone who'd been in a gulag, but to me, it was just these remarkable metaphors describing the unique nature of the disease, and it's just very, very powerful book.
Did you?
And then,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, and then that kind of made me look into some of the others that I ended up really liking. Like there was one by Reynolds Price, the novelist.
Yeah, I know the name, but I've never read him.
I hadn't either. And then he wrote a memoir called A Whole New Life, and it's describing an account where he was diagnosed with a spinal cord cancer, and just this horrible thing that basically like started at the base of his head, and then by the time they found it, it had apparently been developing slowly for decades, and was all running down the spinal column inside, intertwined with the spinal cord in a way that it couldn't possibly be removed, and it's just an amazing book, just describing the experience, and again the metaphors describing the tumor itself, and then the fact that he overcomes this psychologically, even though he's paralyzed, because it's basically inoperable. But there's just some amazing stuff.
Did you ever read
stuff down there?
Have you ever read Susan Sontag, Illness as Metaphor?
Yes. Yeah, Illness as Metaphor. Yes, I read that or reread that, and God, just amazing language in there, including there were things in there that really anticipated, I think, a lot of the understanding in science, or picking up on things that were just barely being understood. And one of the things that really leaped out at me was this idea of cancer as like an alien possession. And when I was writing my book, I came back on that metaphor a lot. In a lot of ways, it's like this quasi creature that's evolving inside of you. And I was reminded of Sigourney Weaver in The Alien, for example.
Yeah.
And then in part of the book, she's talking about science fiction, metaphor of cancer, and it was just like, wow, I'm glad I read this after I wrote my book.
Yeah.
In some ways, because it's nice to have come up with it independently, as I'm sure many people have. And then another one that was even more unique. Like I have a chapter that begins describing the really creepy parallels between tumorigenesis and embryogenesis, between the growth and development of a cancerous tumor and the growth and the development of a fetus. And so many of the same biochemical mechanisms that are involved in an embryo developing in a womb are actually borrowed and co-opted by the cancer cells. And then there's one point where she describes cancer or a tumor as a quote, demonic pregnancy.
Jesus.
Oof. She was such an amazing writer.
I forget, did she actually have cancer herself, or was it some other illness?
Yes, she did, but she didn't reveal that when she wrote Illness as Metaphor, and then it comes out later. They put out a new edition when she had written a long, extended essay, probably in the New York Review of Books, called AIDS.
Yeah,
and its metaphors, and then her first book was republished with that as a second part, or a coda, and then it's only then that you officially learn as a reader that she'd been diagnosed with breast cancer when she was writing Illness as Metaphor.
That's it. Well, I wonder why she chose not to disclose her own cancer.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, a lot of people make that choice. They don't want others to feel sorry for them. Maybe she she's a public figure, an intellectual. She thought that people would judge her writing differently.
Yeah, maybe she didn't want this to be a book of a writer railing against, cancer and her own cancer, of lashing out with words and.
Right.
I mean, maybe it was to maintain, this, more of a sense of cool detachment, because, that's Susan Sontag, just that feeling of cool, observational detachment and amazing command of words.
Yeah. It just reminds me, her concealment of this, there's a famous passage in Varieties of Religious Experience, in which William James is talking about kind of negative mystical experiences, where instead of seeing reality as miraculous and wondrous and divine, you see it as horrible, meaninless, completely empty and random. And the particular experience is he describes a French doctor walking into an asylum and seeing a severely epileptic boy who's basically completely mindless. At least he looks that way. And James has this very powerful description of this kind of animal-like, pathetic creature, and then describes the French doctor supposedly having this sudden reaction and empathy with this creature, thinking, I could be that boy. There's no reason in the world. It's complete random luck that I am here and he's over there, right? And so it's a vision of that randomness at the bottom of things. And then what happened was the French were translating varieties of religious experience, and the translator wrote to James and said, who was that French doctor and what was the asylum? And James admitted that actually he was the person looking at the epileptic boy, and it was an American asylum.
Wow.
And James had that panic attack of recognizing how unfair and random life is.
Wow.
But he didn't want to reveal it.
Wow.
Except he did.
Well, wow. I mean, and then there's the horror of that at one's own condition, or imagining one's own condition, like with cancer, where you probably don't see it, although maybe now you see some imagery. But I just wanted to read this quote from Reynolds Price, A Whole New Life, and I ended up as using it as one of the 3 epigraphs at the beginning of my book. It says, I wonder now, though, if the steady presence of music around me didn't contribute importantly to my sense of the cancer as a thing with its own rights. Now, it sounds a little cracked to describe, but then I often felt that the tumor was as much a part of me as my liver or lungs and could call for its needs of space and food. I only hoped that it wouldn't need all of me.
Jesus.
I mean, man, that is amazing writing.
Well, there are cases, what are they called? Teratomas, or these tumors that are like little embryos, right?
Yeah. I mean, they're germline tumors, and I think they're usually thought to be congenital rather than acquired, somatic mutations, sperm or egg, and I described some of those in the book, and they'll have I just can hardly talk about it. They'll have little bits of hair and fingernails,
right.
and sometimes the rudimentary facial structure, and yet it's a it's a tumor that needs to be removed. I mean, in general, cancer develops in a very different fashion from that, but. Do they ever have rudimentary brains?
The
teratomas?
Yeah.
Or nervous systems?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I mean, I would imagine it would be more like maybe the rudiments of a nervous system or something, but which could be like the core. I mean, I don't know, but
we probably shouldn't talk about this because the Right to Life people will start demanding rights for teratomas.
Oh, God. What a thought.
Did you ever see a movie called How to Get Ahead in Advertising?
Is this an abrupt, graceful transition, or?
I'm sorry. It popped into my head like other things are popping into my head.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
George, you got to see this. I mean, this is
okay.
It's about this super type A. No, actually, he's not super type A. He's in advertising, but he's kind of a nice guy, and it's actually holding him back a little bit. And then he gets like a pimple on his shoulder, right over here, and then he's sort of looking at it, going, "What the hell is that?" And then it becomes a boil, and then gradually it becomes like a little head that sprouts out and then starts yelling at him and
I've heard of this.
And taking over his life.
Oh my God! Yeah, if I did see this, I repressed it.
It's actually an amazingly well-written, funny, very, very dark British comedy. It's very Freudian. So the little head is supposed to be the id, the psychopath within us all. And gradually takes over.
Psychopath within us all.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
Hey, listen. Could you talk about? This might be something that is an idea that's been out there for a while, but I hadn't seen it stated as clearly as you did. You had a really interesting post on cancer as a consequence. Basically just of entropy.
Oh, yeah, I wrote a post on my Fire in the Mind blog called "The Most Powerful Carcinogen is Entropy," and just the fact that the standard view is it takes approximately 6 mutations of a cell that might occur over years or decades in order for it to have all the characteristics of a cancer cell. And then once it does, it starts evolving in this wildfire manner because it's rapidly reproducing itself, and each time it reproduces itself, there's another chance for mutations, and at the same time it's becoming less and less stable and more likely to mutate. But the accumulation, of these half a dozen mutations over a lifetime that happens to hit one cell, there's just so many random factors, and I think they clearly outweigh any of the ones that we can, call deterministic and actually find a reason for. So, people tend to think, we very closely identify, cancer equals a carcinogen or cancer equals carcinogens. And, in a very trivial way, that's true since, a carcinogen is by definition something that causes cancer, and maybe that could be, some confluence of tiny little biochemical effects that you could never tease out and identify that would be involved with other fluctuations, and we can only relegate it to randomness. But still, basically, people think of cancer, no matter how much they know about it, we can't get away from this idea of thinking of it as with the infectious disease imagery, that it's something that we get, that comes at us from outside because we're exposed to carcinogens. And of course, that's part of it. And, a certain amount is genetic inheritance, although surprisingly little. But, a huge amount of it is every time our cells divide, and I think I've said this before, we have, trillions of cells in the body. And every second, 4 million of those is the number that Robert Weinberg once came up with me, just as a back-of-the-envelope calculation. Every second, 4 million of these cells in various parts of the body are dividing.
Wow.
Through mitosis. And inevitably, when they do that, of course, they have to copy all of their DNA, the entire genome, and bequeath it to the daughter cells. And, when they do this, no one is going to expect this to be a perfect process. There's obviously going to be mistakes and errors, and there are. And each time around, we've evolved because of these mistakes and errors. Evolution has gradually equipped multi-celled creatures, metazoans, with all these safeguards. And some of them include these amazingly sophisticated things like DNA proofreading. Where they actually proofread the little enzymes that kind of check the template against the original and make little corrections. But, for all that, still, lots and lots of errors occur and are not corrected. And most of them are either harmless or they just immediately kill the cell, so it's not an issue. But, there's certain ones, like those that encourage a cell to divide more rapidly, and others which knock out the mechanisms that slow down proliferation, the tumor suppressors, and then other ones that knock out a cell's ability to, commit suicide, basically, apoptosis, if the cell senses that, the things have gone haywire. And then there's the telomeres that count how many times a cell has divided, and if it gets, somewhere around 50 or so, then the cell is just basically taken offline. And these things, if they're knocked out, and probably in a certain order, then you get a cell that starts proliferating wildly. And yet still, there's all these random factors beyond that. So, and it came down to me like being pulled in two ways. In one sense, it's amazing that we don't get cancer all the time, because with all these cells just constantly dividing. On the other hand, when you consider all the things that have to go wrong, all the safeguards that have to fail, it's just incredibly unlucky when it does happen.
Hey, did you ever talk to Stu Kaufman about cancer?
Not while I was writing the book. I suspect that I did in the past, and I don't want to reveal anything personal, but I don't think it's I don't think it's something that he's keeping secret. But it's his wife Liz is had a horrible bout with cancer. Yeah.
Did she die?
No, she hasn't.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But it's, I shouldn't talk about it.
Well, the reason I bring it up, of course, is because Stu Kaufman is, it's one of his great obsessions is discovering possibly some counter-entropy force in the universe.
Right.
A self-organization
principles
or
of self-organization,
autocatalysis, or I always thought of it, the way I understood it was just the label I came up with is anti-entropy.
It's kind of anti-entropic, and it goes, Stewart, obviously totally believes in Darwinian selection and variation and selection and the whole paradigm, but he's suggesting that the engine for the mutations may not be entirely random. But there may be some kind of little pattern generating routines that ensure that mutations of a certain kind will happen. Sort of like, there are these very basic chemical reactions that you can do in a dish, and they produce these geometric kaleidoscopic patterns, and this order that's just kind of emerging from very simple chemistry. So he was imagining that there could be, and proposing that there could be these very basic biochemical mechanisms that give rise to a certain amount of order in the mutation, certain patterns, and that this, and that if they were completely, flip of a coin random, the mutations, that that evolution, there would just be too much noise for there to be evolution. There had to be some kind of channeling, and yet there would still be a huge amount of random noise.
Right.
But it's interesting, and it's not clear how you would, go about showing or negating that.
Well, to me, that's it's sort of an obsession of mine as well. I remember having arguments endlessly with some of my colleagues at Scientific American going back to the 80s about how it is that we're here, given the second law, given the drift toward entropy and heat death, and people come up with the how there can be local order even though you get a kind of cosmic drift toward disorder. But it seems to me that if you try to imagine really profound revolutionary breakthroughs in science, that could still be one that Stu Kaufman was onto something.
Yeah, I think so. And the simple answer being, when entropy applies to systems that are open.
Yeah.
To closed systems, and then they're entropic because as they they leak order and consume energy and this exhaust fumes of randomness come out, and they become increasingly less ordered. But if you're feeding energy back into them, you can have a system, and then they eventually become back into equilibrium with just the randomness of the universe. But you can have non-equilibrium systems with energy feeding in, like human life or anything that we as human creatures build, or any creatures like beaver dams or ant hills or wasp nests. But in the long run,
heat death gets us.
Well,
that's the standard view.
But there's a lot of hand waving involved in that, and like how does the energy? Yeah, of course, just the whole Darwinian synthesis is a wonderful answer to that. Even if it is purely random selection, the dominant view, which satisfies me, and random variation and selection. But it's interesting to think. And, in some of Stu's books, like Origins of Order and At Home in the Universe, he talks about different mathematical arguments that if it were purely random, the process of variation and mutations, that you couldn't have the orders that we have. But
right.
You know, obviously an arguable point.
Well, yeah. So this is something I talked about with Murray Gell-Mann when he was still at the Santa Fe Institute, and
oh yeah, he hated it.
And he hated it.
Still hates it.
He called it something else. He said,
and he would put his fingers up like quotation marks.
Something else. He said some people aren't happy with the set of laws that we have now, the laws of physics and Darwinian selection and all that, and they want something else. And then Murray said, There is no something else.
I know, yeah. Oh, he and Stewart used to have these. Those are the glory days of the Santa Fe Institute, when you could go sit in on the talk and hearing Murray Gell-Mann taking apart Stuart Kaufman, or Stuart Kaufman disagreeing with Murray, and
I think, who knows, Stu, if I want to be optimistic about the future of science, listen, I threw a big bucket of cold water on Stu's work in the End of Science, but I hope he turns out to be right. I hope that he was onto something, and that there is. It turns out that, let's say, evolution, the whole apparatus of natural selection plus DNA and all that turns out to be just a kind of special case of some much larger principle of order that Stu Kaufman was trying to discover.
Yeah. It's in some ways I don't know. The idea of being flukes of the universe is never. I've always found that kind of liberating.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It could come down to aesthetic choices. You know, do you prefer to be? We're just here. We're just lucky. Just a roll of the dice. Or no, we were meant to be here. Yeah. There's a divine principle of creation and novelty generation in the universe. Yeah. Therefore, we are.
Of course, we would think. Yeah, I lean more toward Gould, Stephen Jay Gould, and the idea if you ran the tape again a second time, something unrecognizable would probably emerge.
Except,
and there's no guarantee that you would get anything like consciousness or what we perceive as increasing complexity, but I go back and forth on that.
Except that Gould thought he wasn't as hardcore a random guy as, for example, Jacques Monod, because Gould thought that life was inevitable, at least.
Okay, yeah, and Monod would not, yeah.
So if you think that life is inevitable, then, if you've got an infinite universe, I think you could easily convince yourself that intelligent life is also inevitable, and science and art and all that kind of stuff. Whereas Jacques Monod, and there are others who think this way also, think that we might be it. Total fluke.
Yeah.
Nothing else like this. Maybe not even any other life in the universe.
Yeah, Monod's, his little book, Change and Necessity.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean,
that's some scary
that's
shit.
One of the handful of books that just totally blew me away, but I found it exhilarating again. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a certain exhilaration. It reminds me of Steve Weinberg saying in Dreams of a Final Theory, the more the universe becomes comprehensible, the more pointless it seems.
Yeah.
So that kind of really astringent existentialism can be really exciting, even if then you decide you don't believe it.
Yeah. And even if you do believe it, and you can still be a nice person and appreciate sunsets. And
have fun.
Yeah, have fun.
Talk about science on the internet.
And believe it's important to be a good person, and kindness is important and things like that.
That's right. Goodness, virtue, truth, all those things matter, even if they're totally our inventions.
Yeah.
George, we're over an hour.
Yeah. Well, I think we should quit while we're ahead.
Yeah.
Maybe if we had.
Yeah, I think we already had this. I really enjoyed this talk. All right.
I did too.
So let's wrap it up, and maybe I'll talk to you after your book comes out.
Yeah, that sounds good. That'd be very fun to do. Oh, and I just wanted to mention anyone who may be interested in the book. If you go to my my webpage, there's a link to a book site I've been setting up for the Cancer Chronicles, and it has some of the early reviews, Publishers Weekly and Kirkus, and some, basically news about the book. And there's even, I actually decided, I've never seen anyone do this, although no doubt they have, but before the book came out, I decided to post the index and my my annotated table of contents, just so people can kind of get, quickly look at it and get, a quick sense of what the book's about and how wide-ranging it is, and
great idea.
Yeah, I think so. So we'll see.
Yeah, experiment.
Okay.
Trial and error.
Yeah, right.
The source of all order.
Okay, John, that sounds good, and I'm going to go down to the Santa Fe Public Library downtown and get a copy of Pride and Prejudice.
Okay, good. You won't be disappointed, my friend.
Okay, we'll talk about that.
All right, George. I'll talk to you soon.
Hope the rest of your summer's good.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks.